Let's start off our top story now. The U.S. has conducted an airstrike against the Taliban in Afghanistan's southern Helmand province. The strike is the first such attack since a troop withdrawal agreement was signed between the two sides on Saturday. A U.S. forces spokesman in Afghanistan, Colonel Soni Leggett, called the attack a defensive strike to stop a Taliban attack on Afghan forces. In a tweet, Leggett said the fighters were actively attacking an Afghan National Security Forces checkpoint in the region. The spokesperson said Washington is committed to peace, but will defend Afghan forces if needed. He said the U.S. calls on the Taliban to stop needless attacks and to uphold their commitments under the agreement. U.S. President Donald Trump has said the Afghan Taliban have agreed on no violence in the region during a phone call. The telephone conversation came 3 days after the U.S. and Taliban signed the peace agreement in Doha. The Taliban spokesperson said the group's chief negotiator, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, and Trump spoke for 35 minutes. Zabiullah said Baradar called on Trump to not allow anyone to violate the terms of the agreement. He said Trump told Baradar he will soon have U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speak to Ghani to remove hurdles in intra-Afghan talks. Trump told reporters he had a very good conversation with Mullah Baradar.
We don't want violence. We'll see what happens. They're dealing with Afghanistan, but we'll see what happens.
Okay? Do you believe this is a pandemic, sir? Is this a
We had actually a very good talk with the leader of the Taliban. Yeah.
Well, Afghanistan's presidential palace says Qatar has offered its assistance to facilitate intra-Afghan talks. In a statement, the palace said Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani called Afghan President Ashraf Ghani to discuss the Doha deal. It said during that phone call, the two leaders discussed the implementation of the U.S.-Taliban agreement and intra-Afghan talks. The palace said Al Thani said both Kabul and the Taliban have to sort out their differences to form an inclusive government. It said Ghani thanked Sheikh Tamim and asserted he is open to further discussions about peace. Well, to discuss all of that a bit further, we're now joined by Mr. Rahimullah Yousafzai, who is an expert on Afghanistan. He's joining us now from Peshawar. Mr. Yousafzai, thank you for your time here at Indus News. Now, despite President Trump's call to Taliban leaders in order to achieve peace in Afghanistan after the Doha deal, the U.S. has now hit Taliban fighters in Helmand. Do you think this will disrupt intra-Afghan talks?
I don't think this is going to disrupt the peace agreement or the proposed intra-Afghan dialogue. I think it has raised concerns whether this reduction in violence understanding can be sustained because the Taliban yesterday, when they resumed attacks against the Afghan government forces, had also announced that they would not attack the U.S. and its allied forces. But now the U.S. has carried out the airstrike against Taliban fighters in Helmand. That actually can provoke the Taliban to maybe also start attacking the U.S.-led NATO forces. That could create problems. But I believe the U.S. also had to take some action to reassure the Afghan government that it is standing by it. It will not abandon it because Taliban had carried out a number of attacks against the Afghan forces and killed about 20 soldiers and policemen. So the U.S. had to act. But we still don't know how many Taliban fighters have been killed in this U.S. airstrike, whether it was symbolic or whether it was really a very big attack causing casualties among Taliban.
And speaking then about the Afghan government, Mr. Yousafzai, as you know, both Ghani and Abdullah have claimed victory in these presidential elections. How much of a hurdle is that too?
I think that is a big problem now, and it has to be resolved as soon as possible because Ashraf Ghani is going to take oath for his second term in office on March 9th and on March 7th, I believe. So if it happens, he takes oath, then Abdullah also has threatened to hold a separate swearing-in ceremony and take oath as the president of a parallel administration, and that, will create two parallel administrations in Kabul. Then Taliban will say, who represents whom, who is going to talk on behalf of the anti-Taliban forces. So there has to be some sort of an understanding. At least, even if they don't accept each other's victory, they can agree on forming a joint inclusive delegation to talk to Taliban.
And then finally, Mr. Yousafzai, what are your thoughts about whether or not intra-Afghan talks will actually succeed or fail?
I think starting the talks is going to be a challenge. They're supposed to begin on March 10th, and by that time, the prisoners' exchange should have taken place. It's not happening yet, although we have heard reports that some of the Taliban prisoners, have been removed from their cells and their biometrics have taken place. So maybe they are preparing to release them. Also, the Taliban have agreed to meet an Afghan government delegation for the first time in Qatar to discuss the issue of prisoners. So these are hopeful signs, and I think that this could lead to the talks, but that will have to be postponed beyond March 10, because the process of releasing the prisoners must start by that time. But to make the talks a success, that will be a big challenge, because this is not going to be easy.
Very well. We'll leave it there at that. But of course, we do appreciate you taking your time out to speak to us here at Indus News. That was Rahimullah Yousafzai speaking to us there from Peshawar. Let's move on with the news for the moment. A 6-member delegation of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation is visiting Azad Jammu and Kashmir today. That visit comes amid 212-day-long curfew and communications blackout imposed by India in occupied Kashmir. The delegation, led by OIC Special Envoy on Kashmir, Yusuf M. Al-Dubai, will also visit the line of control to assess the situation. During the visit, the envoy will get first-hand knowledge about the loss of lives and property caused by indiscriminate firing of Indian forces. The delegation will also be briefed on the deteriorating human rights situation in the occupied valley. Earlier, Dubai met Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan and said Kashmir's issue is an internationally recognized dispute. In his meeting with the Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, the envoy said the OIC is focused on a peaceful resolution of the issue. In India itself, the Delhi Minorities Commission says the riots in the capital were well planned and one-sided to target Muslims. The Commission's chairman, Zafarul Islam Khan, visited the violence-hit areas of New Delhi. Speaking to media, Khan said around 2,000 outsiders were brought to northeast Delhi under a planned conspiracy. He said most of these people stayed in schools before attacking the neighborhoods. He said the Commission found extensive damage to Muslim houses, shops and workshops. Khan said the Delhi police's presence was minimal during the first 2 days when most of the violence took place. Well, India's Muslim community is still trying to recover after 3 days of violent pogroms that killed over 40 people last week. A Muslim couple has spent nearly a week outside a local morgue waiting to identify the body of the woman's father. More on that now in this report.
Gulshan Nasiruddin's father disappeared last week when mobs of Hindu fanatics launched an assault on Muslims and their neighborhoods. All she's found of him is a single leg that she's been waiting for doctors to identify for a week. The only person she's had with her is her nearly blind husband.
My father's whole body was burnt and only one leg was recovered. So right now, the doctors are saying, how do we believe that it was your father? You can't recognize anything through just one leg. That's why, the day before yesterday, they took a sample for the DNA test, and only after the test, they will be able to establish something definitive.
The impoverished family has now lost its only breadwinner as a result of unfettered Hindu extremism. Such stories have sent a shockwave of fear throughout India, where Muslims say they no longer feel safe.
Whatever happened was wrong, and it should not have happened. Those people should get reformed, and there should be peace all around. It should not be like this, where we are all living a life of fear.
Many Muslim families have left their homes, leaving for cities with less religious tensions. Meanwhile, schools and businesses remain shut in New Delhi.
Due to the shutting down of shops, the businesses are closed. People have suffered losses. The children are not going to schools, and there are problems at people's homes, like milk or bread. So many people have problems.
This is not an isolated incident. Signs of rising Hindu-Muslim tensions have been growing since Prime Minister Narendra Modi took office in 2014. These include cow lynchings and hate-laden speeches by members of the ruling BJP and the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act. As such, India's so-called secular image now lies in tatters, along with the lives of thousands of its Muslim citizens.
Well, the United Nations has appealed for nearly $900 million to help thousands of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. The UN Refugee Agency and the International Organization for Migration have launched a joint appeal for the cause. The UN said the money would address the needs of approximately 855,000 Rohingya refugees. The international body said the funds would also help over 444,000 vulnerable Bangladeshis in the communities hosting Rohingya refugees. It said the funds would cover food, shelter, sanitation, healthcare, education, and protection services. Over 740,000 Rohingya Muslims fled to neighboring Bangladesh after the Myanmarese military launched a massacre in 2017. I'll be back after this break with plenty more news. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back. Turkey says 9 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party have been killed in an airstrike during a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. The Defense Ministry said the military carried out operations backed by air power in the Avasin and Hakurk regions. The ministry said Turkey would continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over the last 5 months, Turkey has killed over 400 Kurdish militants in northern Iraq. Ankara holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign. Russia says Turkey has failed to meet its obligations under a pact to create a safe zone in Syria's Idlib province. The Defense Ministry says terrorist fortifications have merged with Turkish outposts, resulting in daily attacks on Russia's Hmeimim airbase in Syria. The ministry said Ankara violated international law by increasing troop numbers in Idlib equal to a mechanized division. Russia's accusation comes ahead of Thursday's meeting between Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. Turkey, meanwhile, says one of its soldiers was killed, while 9 others were wounded by Syrian forces in Idlib province. With the latest death, 57 Turkish soldiers have been killed in the conflict in the region. The U.S. says it is willing to give NATO ally Turkey ammunition and humanitarian assistance in Syria. Speaking in Turkey, U.S. Special Envoy for Syria Engagement James Jeffrey said Washington is ensuring U.S.-made equipment is ready for the Turkish troops. Stressing Turkey's special status as a NATO ally, Jeffrey said Washington would provide humanitarian aid and share intelligence. The U.S. has already pledged $108 million in aid for the people in Syria. Jeffrey said the U.S. is waiting to see Turkey's diplomatic position with regards to Russia when President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visits Moscow. Pakistan says it fully supports Turkey's efforts in its fight against terrorism. In a telephone call to President Tayyip Erdogan, Prime Minister Imran Khan condoled the death of Turkish soldiers in Syria. Khan said the people of Pakistan are in strong solidarity with the brotherly Turkish nation in this time of grief and sorrow. He reaffirmed support for Ankara's security concerns in the region and also lauded Turkey for hosting millions of Syrian refugees. Prime Minister Khan called upon the international community to help Turkey bear the enormous burden of refugees. Khan also offered to extend all possible support and assistance from Pakistan in that regard. The Prime Minister thanked President Erdogan for his unequivocal support on the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. Amnesty International says Greece has been violating EU and international laws and putting human lives at risk by its measures to block the entry of migrants. In a statement, the rights group said people seeking asylum are once again being used as bargaining chips in a callous political game. Amnesty said Athens must refrain from using excessive force, and those seeking asylum in Greece should not be treated as criminals. Meanwhile, the EU Commission has said Greece is Europe's shield against illegal migrants. The Commission has pledged $780 million in financial aid for controlling migrants. Over 130,000 migrants have crossed into Europe after Turkey opened its borders, while accusing the EU of not fulfilling promises it had made. In the United States, meanwhile, voters have gone to the polls in 14 U.S. states on Super Tuesday, the largest voting day in the Democratic presidential primary race. Former Vice President Joe Biden is projected to win 9 of the 14 states, while early frontrunner Bernie Sanders has captured 3.
Super Tuesday is the most consequential day of voting in the Democratic presidential primary race. Ahead of the vote, Joe Biden picked up endorsements from ex-Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Amy Klobuchar, who have both dropped out. Biden is set to win in Minnesota, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. Exit polls suggest Biden has won large majorities of African American voters, a crucial bloc in the Democratic Party.
We're still waiting for Texas and California, a few other small states to come in. But it's looking good. So I'm here to report we are very much alive. And make no mistake about it, this campaign will send Donald Trump packing.
Despite Senator Sanders' loss to Biden in South Carolina, he still remained the frontrunner heading into Super Tuesday. Sanders is expected to win in Colorado, Utah, and his home state, Vermont.
We're doing well in Texas right now. We won Colorado. And I'm cautiously optimistic that later in the evening, we can win the largest state in this country, the state of California.
The next primary contests are scheduled for March 10th in Idaho, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, and Washington state. A candidate requires more than 2/3 of the delegates to secure the nomination at the party's convention in July.
Italy's Civil Protection Agency has reported the deaths of another 27 people over the last 24 hours from the new coronavirus. The country's death toll is now at 79, the highest in the world outside China, where 38 new deaths have brought its total toll to nearly 3,000. More on that now in this report.
Up to now, 3,200 people from around the world have lost their lives because of the virus, which has further infected over 93,000 people in 70 countries. While the growth of the number of cases in the epicenter, China, has slowed, in Europe and the US, the number of infections has only grown. In Iran, another 11 people have died from the infection, taking their total to 77. South Korea has reported another 516 new coronavirus cases, bringing the country's total to over 5,000, with 32 deaths.
There are about 2,300 confirmed patients in Daegu who are waiting hospital or treatment center admission. The government is deploying all possible resources across the government to increase the number of treatment centers for patients in Daegu who are waiting in their homes.
UK health officials have warned the new coronavirus has the potential to infect 80% of the British population. In the meantime, the number of deaths in the US has risen to 9, while the authorities have reported over 100 confirmed cases.
We've already made a decision on parts of Italy, and Japan is very unfortunate because I've seen the incredible job they did on the Olympics.
The World Bank has committed $12 billion in aid for developing countries grappling with the spread of the disease.
U.S. Federal Reserve has cut its benchmark interest rate by 0.5 percentage point to shield its economy from the impact of the new coronavirus. In a statement, the Federal Reserve says the virus poses an evolving risk to economic activity. The Fed has lowered the federal funds rate to a range between 1% and 1.5%, or 1.25%, I should say, the deepest one-off cut since the 2008 financial crisis. The Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, said the magnitude of the overall effects on the economy remains highly uncertain and the situation remains fluid. Powell said the coronavirus will weigh on the U.S. economy, but the central bank's action will provide a meaningful boost.
We do recognize that a rate cut will not reduce the rate of infection. It won't fix a broken supply chain. We get that. We don't think we have all the answers. But we do believe that our action will provide a meaningful boost to the economy. More specifically, it will support accommodative financial conditions and avoid a tightening of financial conditions, which can weigh on activity.
Well, after the Fed announcement, U.S. President Donald Trump called on the central bank to further cut interest rates and ease monetary policy. On to Europe now, where markets are trading higher with investor confidence surging on the expected global stimulus measures pledged by central banks. London's FTSE 100 is trading 0.75% higher despite major stocks shedding value. Frankfurt's DAX has gained 0.75%. The CAC 40 in Paris is trading fractionally higher. In Asia, Seoul's Kospi gained over 2%. The Shanghai Composite has also gained ground. Meanwhile, international Brent crude oil prices paired early gains, losing a fraction over fears of a global recession. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. And there you have it. You're all caught up. Thank you for watching this bulletin here on Indus News. Of course, for the latest updates on these and other stories, you can always follow us on our social media at Indus.News.